We're here today with Leslie Jordan on Country Pocket. The new album is The Agonist. Leslie, can you introduce me to your grandfather and how you found all of his writings?
Yeah, my grandfather, his name was Robert S. Gott. He went by Bobby Gott. And I never knew him. I didn't even really know much about him when I was a kid. My mom told me stories later in life. He left when she was about 4 years old. So this would have been in the mid 1950s. And throughout her life, they sort of had this sporadic relationship where he would call and they would talk briefly. And most of my mom's life, her mom's side of the family sort of villainized her dad, and so that relationship just was strained and distant from the beginning. And when he passed away in 1995, his sister went to clean out his house in El Cerrito, California, and called my mom. And she said, "Is there anything that you want me to look for of your father's?" And my mom recalled one of those conversations she had with him where he mentioned that he had written her a poem and that he originally wanted to be a journalist. That was what he wanted to go to school for. He wanted to be a writer. And so my mom asked her aunt, "Can you just see if there's anything in writing in his house?" And about a month later, a box full of journals and notebooks showed up on our doorstep. I was 10 at the time, so I don't have any memory of it. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that she shared all of this with me. And as you do when you get older, you start to get curious about your life and your lineage. And she was starting to work on a memoir and sharing some of her writing with me, and in it was some of his writing. And I asked if she would share more of his writing with me, and she photocopied all of his poetry and put it in a binder and sent it to me. So about 8 years ago, I got this notebook full of my grandfather's words that he had written. He was a sort of following the beat poet era, wanted to, I think, model some of his writing after Jack Kerouac and short stanzas, but some short stories. Really a beautiful writer. And so we got to know this man sort of through his writing, someone we never knew in real life. And just a couple years ago, sort of conceptualized this album and took that journey and wrote all these songs and made a record out of it.
So you introduce him on this album as the agonist. What was your big takeaway from his writings?
Yeah, so he referred to himself as the agonist in one of his pieces called The Cape Cod Caper, and I think it was maybe the beginning of the novel he wanted to write. He drove up to Cape Cod and he was in Provincetown and in Greenwich Village. He spent a lot of time in Greenwich Village, sort of in that, yeah, like I said, beat poet era. Um, I learned that he had sort of this undying desire to be known, and he chased that in a lot of different ways, and ran from it in a lot of other ways. So the agonist was what he referred to himself as, which I thought was really interesting. It's sort of a scientific term. It's not really used to refer to a person necessarily, but sort of this binding agent for a drug, and it makes things more effective when you have an agonist. And so I kind of loved that as this concept of the album formed, and that there's this person who sort of independent of it on his own was a bit ineffective, but joined together. And so I'm hoping that maybe this album maybe brings some effectiveness and some resolution to his story and his life.
Yeah, I saw you I saw a little video you did where you read out a story about having a fight with his mother. So the fight is the song I used to introduce this segment.
Cool.
Do you have that writing with you?
Yeah, I do actually. I put together, this is kind of cool. I put together a book of all of the work. So I have all of his words coupled with all the lyrics from the songs, and then some writing prompts for folks who get the book to kind of go on your own journey. Do you want me to read his piece?
Yeah, read to me about what happened with the fight.
Yeah, so this is a short story that he had written called The Fight. The rebellion was over, and she had sent him to wash up. There came a time when children must be made to realize limitations and authority. She had hated to do it, to strike him like that. but he had struck her and used an oath. God knows she had tried to reason with him, and besides, this just wasn't one of her better days. If he hadn't struck me, if he just hadn't struck me, and hitting me in the stomach of all places. And where did he learn that word? Certainly not around here. Those brats next door, no doubt. Undisciplined little pups. And why doesn't his father take a hand to him now and then? You'd think a father would teach his own son something. I don't know what got into me, losing my temper that way. I felt like beating him to death, God help me. But I've been feeling so poor lately. I should make an appointment with the doctor. Why didn't I take him in my arms when he cried so? He tugged at my skirt, but I couldn't do it. He shouldn't have hit me in the stomach. He'll know better next time anyway. He was just getting too big for his britches, and that foul word in my house. I hope I didn't hurt him. No, I think he was more frightened than anything. That look. Oh, I daren't think of it. Why couldn't I have taken him in my arms? The boy had been gone a long time. When he returned, he was wearing a new suit and tie. His hair was flawlessly combed and his face shiny clean. His head was bowed slightly and he was smiling. Something that was there before seemed missing from his eyes.
So this is this is something he got himself into when he was younger.
Potentially, I mean, I think when you read a piece of writing, especially, he's not around to tell us. So one would assume that the narrator is the author, but we can't make that assumption. I have asked a lot of questions about his relationship with his mom, and seems like she was an incredible person, and that potentially that sort of thing, would have been pretty shocking to happen in their home. But I think, what I loved about the piece, and then even in writing the song, is that I think we've all been pushed to a limit. And let's just say this was autobiographical, and there was a moment where he lost his temper and hit his mom. And maybe the assumption even is that she was pregnant. He does have a younger sister and a younger brother. And let's just say he was out of frustration, a child, lost his temper, and then in that moment, she lost hers in return. And I'm not saying we've all had that experience with our kids, but I do think that there are moments when, feelings and emotions are heightened and we react in a certain way that we don't anticipate. And so I loved most of his writing in that sense because, yes, it does feel like something that happened very specifically, uh, possibly to him, if we assume that he is the narrator. But I think we can also find ourselves in that story in a moment of not being in control of our own emotions and the implications, I guess, that has.
Yeah, it's a harsh moment in childhood, I think,
Yeah,
when you push your parents a little too hard, maybe realize they're people too.
yeah,
Um, and just he could write. He could write.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
he did not wind up staying around in a lot of cases, whether it was with your family, with where he grew up. Um, what what seemed to be the driving force behind his needing to leave?
Um, I think there's a lot to his story that um, was kept private, and I think there was probably a lot of trauma from being a young boy and drafted into the military. He went to Japan during World War II. He doesn't write about his experience there, but I would assume that that marks a man. And, um, I think there was longing that he had and a lot of grief. He was an addict. So, I think he had been arrested a lot in his hometown after he came back from the war. Even when he was married to my grandmother, spent a lot of time in jail. And so, my mom has a memory of standing on the front seat of the car while he's being driven to the train station or to the bus station, I guess at that point. And he had just gotten picked up from an all-nighter and spending the night in jail. And so I think back in those days there was not a lot of like uh I don't know if rehab was a thing. Let's just say that. I think jail was seen as sort of a rehab program, and let's sober him up and then send him back out. And he just needed more help than what he was given, and so he spent a lot of his life sort of chained to this addiction, and trying to sort his way through it, and did a lot of it alone because I think he saw how much he hurt the people he loved, in some of those deeper, darker moments of his life.
And is that what we're talking about in Truth or Consequence?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a he speaks mostly in Truth or Consequence of this little place that he served as a desert guard, in the middle of Texas, and it was very isolated and alone. But I think it's more or less that decision that we're all faced with at certain times. But I definitely think that was the question of that song for sure.
All right, let's hear Truth or Consequence. I really like that one, and we'll be right
Thank you.
back.